In this fourth part of the video series, The World of the Bible, we will be presenting a bit of social backdrop to life in biblical times, namely, the farmer's year, the Jewish festivals, their clothing, and daily life. The farmer's year. Do you know that there were also farmers in biblical times? Since every family in biblical times had at least a small plot of land, people most probably were involved in farming. Their main crops were wheat and barley. The farmer plowed the soil and sowed the grain by hand following the autumn rains. If there is winter rain, the harvest time would be in April or May. The Israelites also planted fruits such as grapes, figs, olives, as well as melons, dates, pomegranates, and nuts. They cultivated vegetables such as beans, lentils, onions, cucumbers, and some herbs. How do Israelites harvest? First, the farmer uses a sickle to cut the grain. The sheaves would be left in the field to dry. Then, he threshes the grain on the threshing floor where oxen trod the grain. Next, the farmer fans the grain, throwing it in the air to separate the grain from the lighter chaff, which blew away. Finally, the sieved grain is stored away in sacks or large jars. Check out this illustrated calendar for planting and harvesting season. Aside from planting, the Israelites also herded sheep and goats to get meat and milk, as well as wool and hair, which could be used for making garments. Asses were used by farmers for load bearing and oxen for pulling the plow. The Jewish festivals. The Jewish people had numerous feast days or festivals to celebrate different events throughout the year. Many of the feasts were originally farming festivals. The three major festivals were the Feast of Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of the Tabernacle. Let us begin with the Feast of Passover. This feast celebrates the Israelites' freedom from slavery in Egypt. The Jewish family eats their Passover meal, reenacting the first Passover on 14 Nisan. The Feast of Unleavened Bread. This feast is celebrated for 7 days after the Passover. Jewish families eat unleavened bread to commemorate their 40 years of wandering in the desert. The Feast of Weeks. This feast is a celebration of thanksgiving for God's blessing on the harvest. It begins 50 days or 7 full weeks after cutting the first sheaf. Feast of Trumpets. This feast is a commemoration of God's creation of the world and was celebrated in 1 Tishri. Day of Atonement. This is the most solemn holy day of national confession of sins. It is celebrated on 10th Tishri. The high priest goes into the temple to sprinkle the blood of sacrifice. Feast of Tabernacles. This is a week-long celebration of the harvest. From 15 to 21 Tishri, the Jews live in temporary shelters of branches to remember God's care for the Israelites in their journey from Egypt to Canaan. Feast of Lights, or the Feast of Dedication. It is celebrated on 25 Kislev. The feast celebrates Judas Maccabeus' victory and the rededication of the temple in 165 or 4 BC. It is known as Feast of Light because an 8-branched candlestick is used, with an extra lamp to light the others on each of the 8 days of the feast. It is commemoration of the miraculous provision of oil at the first celebration. Purim. Purim is celebrated from 13 to 15 Adar. It marks the deliverance of the Jews through Esther. Finally, New Moon. It is a celebration at the beginning of each month. Clothing. How was the clothing of people in biblical times? Men's clothing. Men used a loincloth. Most men wore an inner and an outer garment. The inner garment was normally of linen or wool and had long sleeves. It was fastened with a belt and fell to the knees or ankles. The outer garment worn on top of this was a square cloak made of animal skin or wool. It was worn draped over one or both shoulders. Without it, a man is considered as naked. It could also be used at night for sleeping. Wealthy men often wore beautifully embroidered outer garments of fine linen. How about women's clothing? Women also wore simple undergarments, though it was usually higher at the neck and often reached right down to the ankles. Their clothes were usually white in color, sometimes black or blue. Rich women, like their men, wore fine linen, dyed purple and red, and decorated with jewels, gold, silver, and elaborate embroidery. Women wore simple head coverings like modern prayer shawls. Let us also discover how a typical day of people in the biblical times goes. First, take a look at their houses. Ordinary people's homes were very simple, built of mud or lath and plaster. Houses consisted of 1 or 2 rooms. In villages, small houses were often built with 4 rooms around the central courtyard, where the animals could take shelter. In the cities, houses were built close together, but were sometimes 2 stories high. houses had flat roofs, constructed from brushwood, earth, and clay. The family could rest, sleep, and work. What about inside the house? Doors were low and framed by wooden or stone doorposts. They rotated inward and could be barred from within. Windows were small, unglazed, and positioned high in the wall, with additional light provided by small oil lamps. Peasants possessed little furniture apart from coarse skins that were unrolled at night on the raised platform made of beaten mud on which the family slept. Who did the housework? Cooking, cleaning, spinning, weaving, and serving were housework that the woman of the house did. She would sometimes help in the fields and vineyards and teach her children in their early years. There were normally 2 meals each day: a breakfast of bread, fruit, and cheese, and a larger supper of meat, vegetables, and wine. Bread was baked fresh each day on an oven or hearth in the house or in the courtyard. What about the practice of religion? Jews go to the synagogue for worship. There is at least one synagogue in nearly every town and village. During the exile, when the Jews had no access to the temple, they started having services in synagogues. The synagogue developed their own form of services, parallel to that of the temple. Services are held every Sabbath and on the Jewish festival days. It is open for prayer 3 times a day. A 7-branched lampstand or menorah and a lamp of eternity stand in the main room of the synagogue. There are prayers, scripture readings, and praise during worship. The sacred rolls of the law, or the Torah, are kept in a special cupboard. There is a courtyard with small rooms leading off it that were built onto the main structure in a larger building. Note that women and children were allowed only into the gallery of the synagogue. Herod's Temple. Around 20 BC, Herod the Great embarked on constructing the Temple of Jerusalem. First, the Temple Mount area on which the temple stood was doubled in size in a huge earth-moving operation. The new temple was magnificent, constructed in white marble and decorated in gold. Its plan was similar to Solomon's temple, with the holy place and the Holy of the Holies within. Although anyone could enter the outer court of the Gentiles, only Jewish people were allowed inside the inner courtyards. The court of the Gentiles was a marketplace where visitors bought and sold and changed their money into special coins for offerings and temple tax. It is interesting, isn't it? A glimpse of the Jewish cultural milieu shows how they value their history, the history of how God has saved them and continues to bless them.